2:47 p.m., January 29th, 1945. Holzheim, Belgium. The snow. Well, it was deep. Waist deep in some spots and crusty on top. Leonard Funk, First Sergeant Funk, walks around the corner of a stone farmhouse and just stops. Stops dead. There they are. 90 Krauts. Just staring. Half of them are already holding weapons, you know. The other half, they're grabbing rifles from a pile on the ground. Fast. 4 of our boys, paratroopers, are kneeling in the slush. Hands behind their heads. These Germans. Well, they were prisoners 20 minutes ago, captured during the assault on the village, guarded by only 4 men. All we could spare. Now they're free. Armed. Organizing to hit Company C from the rear. A German officer steps forward. He shoves the cold muzzle of an MP-40 submachine, the cold rifle, right into Funk's stomach. Screams something in German. Funk doesn't speak a lick of the language. Most of us didn't. The officer screams again, louder this time. Face turning a dark shade of red. Veins popping in his neck. Funk looks at those 90 Germans. Looks at his own men on their knees. Looks at that black barrel pressed into his gut. And he starts laughing. Just cackling. Reminds me of this kid back in basic training, Fort Benning, who laughed during the night infiltration course while the live rounds were snapping overhead. People thought he'd snapped. Maybe Leonard had too. The German officer. Well, his face twists. Confused. Then rage. He screams even louder. Funk laughs harder, shoulders shaking, bending over a bit. You can smell it. The wet wool of the uniforms. The stale, sour scent of cabbage and engine grease hanging in the frozen air. The itch of the lice under the wool of his shirt. You can't ever get away from that, you know. Not in the Bulge. The math says he's dead. 90-1. There's that metallic taste in the back of your throat. Fear. Tastes like chewing on a dirty copper penny, or maybe it's just the stale taste of K rations. It's a surreal thing, really. This little paratrooper. Barely 5'5". 140 pounds soaking wet. Just a clerk from Pennsylvania. Laughing at a man who is about to erase him from the earth. Everything slows down. The wind whistling through the rafters of the barn. The sound of boots shifting in the crusty snow. The MP-40 pressed hard against the fabric of his field jacket. A single, dark circle in the olive-drab cloth. The silence after a shell hits. That's how it felt. Just him and the cold rifle. And that laugh. Funny how small things stick with you. Like the way the officer's eyes weren't even looking at Leonard's face. They were looking at the stripes on his arm. A leader. A prize. Leonard just keeps cackling, hands down by his sides, breath coming out in white puffs, just waiting. August 27th, 1916. Braddock, Pennsylvania. Just a steel town, really. Smokestacks, foundries along the Monongahela River. The smell of iron and coal dust. It was everywhere. You couldn't hang laundry out without it turning gray. Leonard grew up fast. Had to. He was taking care of his younger brother while other kids were still playing in the dirt. Then the Depression hit. Hard, grinding through its 5th year by the time he finished school. Jobs were, well, they were scarce. College? A fantasy for a kid from Braddock. He ended up as a store clerk. Just a regular guy behind a counter. June 1941. The world was already on fire over in Europe. Funk's number comes up in the draft. He's 24, 5'5", barely 140 pounds. I remember seeing guys like him at the induction center. The Army physical examiner looks at him and probably thinks, clerk duty, filing papers in some office in D.C. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Leonard volunteers for the paratroopers. Back then, Airborne was a new thing, a mystery, jumping out of a perfectly good airplane into the dark. Sounded like a suicide mission to most of the boys. But the volunteers, they were a different breed. Had to be. Training was designed to break you. Just break you down to the bone. 5 weeks of running until your lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. Jumping, falling. Conditioning that would make a mule quit. Half the boys washed out, just couldn't hack it. Then the towers, 250 feet in the air. Then the real thing. Standing in the door of a C-47 at 1,200 feet. The wind is tearing at your face. Your gut tells you to grab the frame and never let go. The ground is a long, long way down. But you jump. You trust the silk. Funk earned those wings. Assigned to Company C, the 508th, Florida, then England, late 43. They joined the 82nd Airborne, the All-Americans. Those guys were veterans, Sicily, Italy. They'd already seen the dying. Funk was the new guy, 27 years old. Ancient by our standards. Most of the squad, they were barely 20, still had that look in their eyes. But Leonard, he had this quiet steadiness, a maturity. You could see it when he checked his gear. He wasn't loud, he wasn't a talker, just quiet competence, the kind of man you follow when things go sideways. June 6th, 1944, 1:30 in the morning. The sky train is shuddering. Flak is exploding like giant black flowers outside the window. Funk is standing in the stick. 60 pounds of gear strapped to his small frame. Thompson submachine the cold rifle. Rations, ammunition. Everything's heavy. The plane is too low. Maybe 400 feet. Too low for a safe jump. But the pilots can't climb. The Krauts are throwing everything at us. Tracers arcing through the black, like angry fireflies. You can hear the metal, fragments pinging off the fuselage, like rain on a tin roof. The light turns green. Funk jumps. The prop blast hits him like a freight train. Then the chute opens. And for a second, the world goes quiet. Just him and the wind. Below him, France. Occupied France. Enemy territory in every direction. Chaos. Just chaos from the first minute. Formations scattered across 50 miles of countryside. Boys landing in flooded fields, drowning under the weight of their own gear. Others landing right in the middle of German camps. Funk lands hard. His ankle, it twists. Badly. Sprained or maybe fractured. The pain is sharp, immediate. Every step is going to be agony for the next 2 weeks. But he can walk, he can fight, and that's all that mattered. He buries his chute, starts moving, 40 miles from his drop zone, alone in the dark, in enemy territory. It didn't seem important then, but he just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Within hours, he's got a group of lost paratroopers. 18 of them, all looking for someone to lead. Funk gives it to him. 10 days he leads them through the dark, hiding by day, fighting when they have to. Always the lead scout, even with that bum ankle. He put himself in the front to protect the boys. They link up on June 17th. Every single man survived. Not one casualty. 10 days behind the lines. And Leonard brings them all home. The Silver Star, Bronze Star, his first Purple Heart. But Leonard, he was just getting started. He had that steel in him. He didn't know the future. He only knew what was happening right then. Life's messy like that. You just keep walking. September 17th, 1944. Holland, the sky. Well, it was just a sea of silk. Operation Market Garden. The biggest airborne job in history. 35,000 boys dropping into the Netherlands to grab a line of bridges all the way to the Rhine. Montgomery. He had this big plan. Get us into Germany by Christmas. We heard that a lot. Back then, we didn't think much of it. We just jumped. The 508th was operating near Nijmegen, trying to secure the drop zones so the heavy stuff could come in. Funk is on the ground. He's looking up and he sees the gliders. Those big, clumsy birds, made of plywood and cloth. They're full of jeeps and ammunition and boys who hadn't even touched the grass yet. You could hear 'em creaking as they caught the wind, like a haunted house in the sky. And then he hears it, that rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It's flak. 3 German 20mm guns, Vierlings, they called 'em, dug in on the high ground near Weiler. They were just chewing those gliders to pieces. You could see the splinters flying in the air, falling like toothpicks. If those guns didn't stop those boys in the gliders, well, they were dead before they even skidded to a halt. Funk looked around. He had 3 men. Just 3. Now, if you look at the books, they say you need a 3-to-1 advantage to take a prepared position. Funk was looking at about 7-to-1 against him. 20 Krauts up there behind sandbags and camouflage, interlocking fire. It didn't seem important to check the books then. He just started moving. Always from the front. He's crawling through that Dutch grass. It's thick and damp. Smells like wet earth and clover, and maybe a bit of cow manure from the farm nearby. He's got his Thompson, the M101. It's cold, steel, heavy. It's got that smell. The cold rifle oil, and old cordite, and maybe a bit of the wool from his sleeve. You can taste the fear in the back of your throat. Tastes like you're chewing on a dry copper penny, you know. Reminds me of this time in basic training, trying to sneak past the drill sergeant in the dark. But this was real. There wasn't any safety net here. He didn't give a long speech. He just waved 'em forward. They assault the pits. It's a mess. Smoke, the clack, clack, clack of the Thompsons, and the crack of the Mausers. You're so close you can see the buttons on their tunics. You can see the steam from their breath. You can smell the sweat and the engine grease on the gunners. Funk and his 3 men. They just overran the whole works. Neutralized all 3 guns and the crews, just like that. The gliders started coming in then, skidding across the fields, kicking up dust and dirt. One of 'em almost clipped a tree right in front of us. The guns were silent. Just the sound of the wind through the silk shoots caught in the trees, flapping like ghosts. It's funny what sticks with you. I remember the way the sun hit the brass casings on the ground. They were still hot, steaming in the damp air. At the time, nobody really thought much of it. Just another job done. But the brass in the back, they noticed. Distinguished Service Cross. That's the big one. 1 step below the Medal of Honor. Most fellas earn a Silver Star, and they're the hero of the town for 40 years. But Funk already had a Silver Star from Normandy. Now the DSC. He was becoming a legend, even if he didn't act like it. He just wiped the grit off his face and checked his magazine. He was 27, an old man in a squad of 19-year-olds. He had this quiet way about him, steadiness. You follow a man like that into a furnace because you know he'll find the way out. He didn't know the future, didn't know about the Ardennes, or the snow that was coming. He just knew the gliders were down. The itch of the wool uniform against his neck was driving him crazy. It always did in the humidity, and he probably just wanted a decent cup of coffee. Real life is like that. Not a movie. Just wait, and cold. And the silence after the shooting stops. It's so loud it rings in your ears. He stood there on that hill near Weiler and watched the gliders land. Just another day in hell. And he'd saved hundreds of boys he didn't even know. Funny how small things stick with you, like the way the Dutch grass felt under his boots, or the smell of the burnt powder. He was just a clerk from Pennsylvania, but he was the most dangerous man in Holland that morning. And then, well, you just keep moving. Always moving. You don't get much time for reflection when the Krauts are a mile down the road. You sort of exist in the next 10 minutes. That's how we survived. 1 10-minute block at a time. Leonard. He was good at that. Better than most. Just a small guy with the cold rifle, making sure the rest of us made it to the next morning. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes forest. It was a nightmare. A cold, white nightmare. Hitler. He threw everything he had left into that woods. 3 armies, 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks. They just crashed through the lines. We were thinly held. Green troops mostly. Well, some veterans too, trying to get a bit of rest. But there wasn't any rest coming. The Battle of the Bulge. Biggest fight the army ever saw. 89,000 casualties before the snow. Finally stopped. Turning red. The weather. Heck, the weather was just as likely to kill you as the Krauts. 5 degrees below zero. Ice everywhere. You'd sit in your foxhole and listen to your own breath freezing on your collar. Men froze to death. Right there, sitting upright. Weapons would jam because the oil turned to slush. Vehicles, they wouldn't start, just dead iron in the snow. You can taste the stale K rations, that dry, chalky biscuit that sticks in your throat when you haven't had water in 2 days because your canteen is a solid block of ice. And the itch, that damn itch of the lice in the wool seams. You want to scratch it. You want to scratch it until you bleed, but you just sit there, trying to stay quiet. Then we heard about Malmedy. December 17th, just 1 day into the mess. A convoy of our boys, artillery observers, radio guys, mostly rear echelon stuff, ran right into Piper's SS battle group at the crossroads. They surrendered. The situation was hopeless, you know. So they did the right thing. Put their hands up. Disarmed. Prisoners of war. They herded 84 of them into a farmer's field. Just a patch of snow and muck near Bognes. Then the SS. Those bastards. They just opened fire. Machine guns, pistols, rifles. Shot 'em down like cattle. Men who fell wounded were finished off with a shot to the head. Some boys played dead for hours in the snow, listening to the Krauts walk past, listening to them laughing. Can you imagine that? Laughing while you're lying next to your dead friends. When the news got to us, when it got to Leonard. Something changed. Something hard and cold settled in his gut. Before Malmedy, well, there were rules, unspoken mostly, but real. You surrender when you're beat. You get treated according to the convention. Professional, sort of. But after that field in Belgium, the rules were gone. Just gone. Leonard heard about those boys. He looked at his Thompson, the M1A1, and he made a decision. A hard one. He wasn't ever gonna surrender. Not to the SS. Not to any of them. It wasn't about big picture, personal. Like a promise you make to yourself in the dark when you're sure you're gonna die. Reminds me of this time in basic training. No. It was back in Pennsylvania. My old man had this dog that got mean, and you just knew how it had to end. Leonard had that same look. A cold, quiet anger. The metallic taste of fear was always in your mouth, but now it was mixed with something else. Something like iron. No SS prisoners. That's what the word was in some of the units. You see friends dying, murdered after they gave up, and you stop caring about the finer points of law. You just care about the man in the hole next to you and having enough rounds for the next assault, a long dark month. The silence after a heavy shell hits. That ringing in your ears that feels like it's never gonna stop. Just another day in hell. Only this time, hell was frozen over. Leonard, he was 27, an old man compared to the boys around him. He watched them shiver. He watched them cry for their mothers in the middle of the night. He just kept that promise. Never surrender. It didn't seem important then. Just a thought in the back of his head while he was trying to keep his toes from falling off. But it was gonna matter. Gonna matter a lot. Funny how a decision made in a frozen foxhole changes the way you look at the cold rifle in your stomach. He just sat there smoking a bit of cheap dry tobacco and waited for the pushback. Life's messy like that. You think you know how you'll act, then the world turns white and you find out who you really are. Leonard Funk. He knew who he was, and he knew he wasn't going to be another body in a field. January 29th, 1945. Holzheim. A cold that didn't just bite, it chewed on you, real deep. Leonard, he was acting XO of Company C by then. But the company, well, it was mostly just names on a casualty list. He needed bodies for the assault, so he walks into the supply tent, the mess tent, looks at the clerks and the cooks, men who'd spent the whole war behind a desk or a stove. You're all infantry now, he tells them, just like that. Grab your guns. Heck, reminds me of this cook back in training who couldn't hit the side of a barn. No, wait, it was the supply sergeant who had the bad eye. But Leonard didn't care. He needed rifles. They marched 15 miles through a blizzard, snow up to your waist. Every step, it's like pulling your leg out of wet concrete. Exhausting. Your lungs burn like you're breathing in fire. They hit the village. Funk leads from the front, always the front. They clear 15 houses, house by house, room by room, shouting, the smell of cordite and wet plaster. They grab 80 prisoners, but Leonard, he can only spare 4 guards, just 4. Keep 'em here, he says. He heads back out to finish clearing the town. While he's gone, this German patrol slips in. 10, maybe 20 guys in white camo capes. They look like ghosts in the snow. You know? In the confusion. In the wind. You can't tell who's who. They overwhelm our 4 guards. Force them to their knees. Now you've got 90 Germans, armed and ready to hit Company C from behind. It would have been a massacre. Pure and simple. Those poor bastards didn't see it coming. Then Leonard walks around the corner, just checking on things. Routine. He rounds the farmhouse and freezes, 90 rifles, all aimed at him. A German officer strides up, shoves an MP-40 right into Leonard's stomach, screaming in German, "Surrender, drop the cold rifle." But Leonard, well, he doesn't speak a word of it. He just looks at the officer, looks at the 90 Krauts. Then he thinks about Malmedy. He thinks about those 84 boys in the field. He'd already promised himself he'd never surrender. Not ever. To nobody. So instead of putting his hands up, he starts laughing. He cackles, bending over, shoulders shaking. The officer, his face is turning purple, confused, veins bulging in his neck. Some of the Krauts even start to grin. They think it's a joke, but it's a ruse. Or maybe he just really thought it was absurd. Facing certain death with a laugh. Whatever it was, it buys him 2 seconds. Just enough time for the German to relax his grip. Leonard reaches for his Thompson. It's slung over his shoulder, the way we always carried him. He brings it down in one motion. Lightning. He squeezes the trigger. The Thompson. It's a hell of a cold rifle at close range. Sledgehammers. 30 rounds in 3 seconds. The officer is dead before he hits the ground. Leonard doesn't stop. He can't stop. He pivots, sprays an arc of lead across the snow, screaming at his guards to grab the rifles. He reloads, muscle memory taking over in the middle of the carnage. Slam, rack, fire, steam rising from the barrel. It's a blur of brass and blood. 60 seconds. That's all it took. 21 Germans dead in the snow, 24 wounded. The rest? They throw their weapons down, hands up, prisoners again. Leonard stands there in the middle of it all, smoke curling from the muzzle. He looks at his boys. He's breathing hard. That, he says, was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. He didn't know about the Medal of Honor then. He just knew he was alive. Funny how small things stick with you, like the way the snow felt on his face right after the shooting stopped, or the smell of the hot brass in the cold air, mixed with that sour cabbage smell of the Germans. Life's messy like that. 1 minute you're a store clerk from Pennsylvania. The next, you're a legend. He just wiped the grit off his face and kept moving. Always moving. You don't think about history when you're in it. You just think about the next 10 feet. And then, what do you think happens? You just keep going. Until the war stops. Or you do. Leonard, he kept going. Always found a way to the next 10 feet. And I suppose that's why we're here talking about it. Just a little guy, laughing at the dark, holding his ground when the math said he was gone. September 5th, 1945. The White House Rose Garden. President Harry Truman is leaning in, placing that blue ribbon with the gold star around Leonard Funk's neck. Funk's standing there, 5'5", maybe 140 pounds in his dress uniform. He looks tiny next to the brass. Truman looks him right in the eye. And I heard this from a fella who was there. He says, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." Think about that. The man who had the bomb. The man who was reshaping the whole world, looking at a former store clerk from Pennsylvania and saying he'd rather be in his shoes. Heck. Leonard didn't even look like a legend, but he had it all. The Medal of Honor, the DSC, the Silver Star, Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts. 3 separate times the Krauts managed to hit him, and he just kept fighting. Most decorated paratrooper of the whole war. And then, well, the war just stopped. Leonard went home, back to Pennsylvania. He didn't write a memoir. He didn't go on the radio or try to get into politics. He didn't cash in on being a hero. He just got a job. For 27 years. 27 years, Leonard sat at a desk for the Veterans Administration, helping other vets with their paperwork, processing claims, cutting through red tape for the boys who'd given everything. The same kind of quiet, necessary work he'd done before the draft. Funny how small things stick with you. Like the way he never brought his medals to the office. They were in a case somewhere at home. He and Gertrude. They lived in McKeesport, a working-class town. Had 2 daughters. If people asked about Holzheim, about the laughing, he'd just shrug. Did what I had to do, he'd say. It. No long stories, no glorification. He was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the 82nd, but he didn't act like it. November 20th, 1992. He was 76 years old. They buried him at Arlington, Section 35. Grave 23-734. Just one white marker among thousands of others. Exactly how he wanted it, I suppose. It reminds me of this guy in my old unit. No, it was a fella from the neighborhood who'd spend all day fixing his porch and never mentioned he'd been at the Bulge. Most folks today, they don't know Leonard Funk. They know the movie stars. But they don't know the short, quiet guy who laughed at 90 Germans and killed 21 of them with a Tommy the Cold rifle. Courage. It ain't about the size of the man. It's about what you do when there's the cold rifle in your gut and the math says you're dead. Leonard, he was the most dangerous animal on the planet because he kept thinking when everyone else had stopped. Just a clerk from Braddock, in a quiet grave, under the grass in Arlington.